Our full names are going
Good evening. This is Pastor Lauren, and I am joined with Audrey and a few of our youth from Roseville Lutheran Church. And we're going to be having a conversation tonight just about the documentary, A Time for Burning. The youth were able to watch this documentary together or separately, and we've had a few conversations around the themes of race and injustice as they're presented in the documentary. But before we begin our conversation, I would just love it if you all were able to introduce yourself, how long you've been a member at Roseville, where you're going to school, and why don't I start with Holly and Lexi?
Okay, I'm Holly. I've been a member at RLC for about a year, but I've been going here for about 5 years. I'm going to be a sophomore at Roseville Area High School next year.
I'm Lexi. I'll also be a sophomore at Roseville Area High School next year. Same as Holly, been a member for 1 year, but been going here for 5 years.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Phil. I'm a member. I've been a member of Roseville Lutheran for over 14 years, and currently I'm studying poli-sci in college, and hoping to use that in whatever ways that God asks me to use it once I graduate with my degree.
And I'm Kaylee. I have also been a member for probably about 14 years, and I will be a sophomore in college studying biomedical engineering and also possibly a minor in law and policy.
Wonderful. And Audrey, why don't you just kind of start us off in our conversation today? I don't know if you want to say any prelude or anything to kind of where we got to this point in our conversation, but why don't we just kind of start talking?
The youth at Roseville Lutheran have been talking about race issues pretty explicitly since George Floyd's killing this spring. And so I feel like watching this documentary has been a great opportunity to sort of make the connections to what's happening in our congregation and also what's happening in the rest of the world. So I guess I just want to hear, to start off, what some of the emotions you felt were when you watched the documentary. I feel like it was pretty hard-hitting in the sense that it was very relatable to today's events, and so I'd like to hear what are some of the emotions that you felt while watching this film?
For me, one of the biggest things I took away from it was just the ability that the pastor was able to have to stay calm and cool and collected throughout the entire process of doing this exchange of members, because since it took place in the 1960s, he for sure already knew there was going to be a lot of backlash, but his willpower to go through with it. And one of the quotes that really struck with me was when they were talking about how we're celebrating our 100-year anniversary of being a member, and what good is 100 years if we can't let in 10 Lutheran families into our church, and only just because they share a different skin tone is the reason why we're afraid to have them in our church. So I thought that was a very powerful quote within the documentary.
How about you, Kaylee? What were some of your kind of thoughts as you're watching it? I mean, recognizing we're talking about a documentary that was shot in 1966. It's a while ago.
Yeah, for me it was surprising but not surprising that it was a while ago, but it still seems like some of a lot of the same issues that we're still dealing with now. And just at the end, I was just shocked and disappointed when I learned he was forced to resign for just these conversations, and just really it seems like a small step that ended up with a huge reaction that I just did not expect.
Yeah. How about you, Lexi, or?
I feel like the main emotion that I felt was just kind of just anger about how I feel like everyone kept on making an excuse for why they shouldn't collaborate with the Black Lutheran Church, and I just feel like it it should be obvious that we should try to break boundaries and like collaborate with people of different races, just because that's like kind of a part of being a Christian, is like loving your neighbor. So it just made me kind of angry that no one was realizing that, and they just kept on making excuses for why they shouldn't be doing things. And yeah.
I feel like it was just a little bit like eye-opening for a lot of people watching the film. I feel like, just because obviously like it was a long time ago and the times were different, but there's just so many similarities that you would think like would be different now. I don't know, people think that we're more of like a modern church and things like are kind of perfect now and solved, but in reality we still have like a long ways to go before, I don't know, everyone feels included.
Yeah. What I thought was startling was that how many voices weren't at the table, right? It wasn't just people of different skin tones or color, but even, 1966, the women's voices weren't also being heard either. So we have, kind of this awareness as you sit there and watch that, but then also, I think all of you kind of mentioned it, that these perspectives still haven't changed today, especially in the when we get around the conversation of race relation, of justice. And I'm just wondering, what were some of those pieces within the film that just kind of made you feel a little uncomfortable, or that were difficult to hear?
I would without a doubt say one of the things that I saw that really like opened my eye, because I'd seen similar words being spewed out in more recent times, is where they're saying how when there's more African American families moving into white neighborhoods, then the quicker the neighborhood deteriorates. And in today's time, we have people who are saying, if there's more affordable housing that's built in my neighborhood, then we're going to just move farther up north, or we're just going to move out of this city, because they don't want their prices of their houses to go down. And it's very disheartening hearing some of that stuff being spewed out today, because there's some connection between that and what was being spewed in the 1960s, and especially in that documentary. And it's kind of it's hurtful to know that certain people feel like their situation in life, the value goes down because there's a minority person within their bubble or within their community.
Well, and we're taping this the first week of August, and that's really one of those discussions that's kind of out there right now about fair housing and equity in housing. And again, this 1966, kind of the mirroring that we see. Yeah. How about you, Kaylee? Is there anything that you found that was kind of made you uncomfortable to listen to just in the moment?
For me, it was really the talks within the Augustana groups, when they were talking about just having the conversations with the members of Hope Lutheran, and everyone just kept saying the timing isn't right, and it's such a big step when it just doesn't seem like it really was. And just like someone else was saying, like the excuses they just kept making, that just is disheartening, like you said, Phil.
Yeah, I have to agree with Phil, but the thing that I was bothered the most by was just about like the property values going down. And it's not like, as Christians we shouldn't value property or over a human life and like community and all those Christian values that just weren't really present in those conversations. So
yeah, I feel like everything there's just so many things are just like still relevant today, and a lot of things like you shouldn't just make excuses when, I don't know, they don't really matter, when it just seems like such a simple thing. And I don't know, people just kept making excuses for everything.
Yeah. Well, and another great quote that was said in the documentary that was kind of powerful was when they're having their meetings, one of the guys proposed saying, maybe we don't know them. Maybe we don't know someone as a human because we only see their skin tone and not their humanity. And sometimes, even for me personally, through what I've experienced throughout my time here in America, oftentimes I've had people, see me through my skin tone and not as another genuine human being. I was followed while cleaning up trash, and the person who was in the car following me, they didn't see the humanity in me of picking up trash, but rather they saw a black person in a suburban area and had to do their due diligence and follow me. And I'm sure, many other African Americans have had to deal with seeing their skin tone being the first thing and not their humanity.
Mhm.
I think that's like especially disheartening coming from Christians, because we talk so much about loving your neighbor, and like especially at Roseville Lutheran, that every single person is your neighbor no matter what they look like. That just, it seems like the people at Augustana are just missing out on that core Lutheran value.
So how, I guess I'm just going to kind of ask the question, how do you see Roseville? You said, we have this, this mission and vision statement to love God and love your neighbor, that we see, this broader. Do you think we see it, or do we just speak of it? Do you know what I'm asking in that?
I would say without a doubt, people have the want to help and the want to get there. And the hardest thing, I think, is figuring out whether or not what we are doing together is going to be beneficial in the end, because sometimes we don't see the results right away. It makes it harder for you to feel like what you are doing is the right move. But if you know that you're coming from a place of genuine care for others, then no matter what the outcome is, you know that you're coming from a place of solid foundation, because that's the way that the Lord would want us to carry ourselves about these tough issues.
What has been the experience of racism within our own community, coming from people of your age? And Phil, you've mentioned a little bit of that. I mean, you can speak into that some more as well.
Yeah, I guess a good analogy to kind of give you guys is that I believe that all of us who live in the suburbs all live in this bubble, myself included. But when I leave the community of Arden Hills, leaving that bubble of Roseville, Arden Hills, Shoreview area, then I'm just perceived as another African American. But for me, my bubble was burst both outside of the bubble multiple times and inside the bubble. And so my experience as African American is through my lens and not necessarily the experience of all African Americans. So without a doubt, African Americans, let's say in southern states, they probably deal with racism on a degree that I probably don't have to deal with it. But some examples of racism that I've had to deal with that are kind of difficult, which is, I'll ask you guys how you guys would respond to this situation. Was I had a friend who came up to me and said, "Hey, Phil, you're one of the few Black people I feel comfortable being around." And, what would your first initial response be to a friend saying what they, I guess, perceived as a compliment, but without a doubt had some really, harsh tone to it. So, and then I've had somebody call me, within a day after that incident, said, "Phil, what are you doing out here? Shouldn't you be back out in the fields picking cottons?" And just jokes like that seems like, there's no consequences for saying them within our community, because it's just another, joke. But in reality, for an African American, they see that in a totally different way. So I've had to kind of learn to forgive, but it's hard for me to forget. My friends forget, and they know that I've forgiven them, but it's a lot of weight and baggage that I have to carry. And so I have many stories that I could share, but that's just a few snippet ones. And the last one I would share is, after the Sandro Castillo's death, he died because the officer was afraid that he's pulling out a gun, but he's just pulling out his black wallet. And I myself carry around I used to carry around a black wallet, but now I carry around a brown wallet because I don't want to have a wallet that looks like a gun. And that just extra little bit of thinking that I have to do just to protect myself and to feel like I'm non-threatening to others is a step that I have to take that others don't, because they don't walk around in my skin tone. So I'm sure many other African Americans have dealt with things that are a lot worse than I have, but I've had my fair share of experiences too.
I appreciate that you're willing to share from your experience as a person of color, Filipos.
Thank you.
How is race talked about within the schools that you guys participate in? How are the issues of race, but also justice, injustice?
I feel like Roseville does a really good job of, or not, I mean, you know, they could always be better, but I do feel like they do a pretty good job about talking about race. Like last year in English, we read like probably 2 or 3 books that the main focus was race and like racial injustice and that sort of thing. In elementary school, I feel like especially after the Flandel Castile stuff, we talked about it quite a bit too. So yeah, I do feel like they do a pretty good job.
I feel like a lot of people in schools or like staff and administration people, they all recognize that it's a problem and we need to talk about it, but I feel like a lot of times people don't know how, which is like understandable. But I feel like, I don't know, everyone in Roseville could do a better job, but I think it's just, I feel like people need help of understanding how they can help people more instead of just trying to talk about things, but I feel like that's hard for a lot of people to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely also feel like I did have a good education on it. I remember when I was in middle school, the Science Museum had a exhibit on how race is a social construct, and so we went and got to look at that, and it was super interesting and super informative on like how it's made up, but it is the reality we live in now because someone made it up. And so we did a really good job about talking about it, but I feel like I still would witness things like racist things. I specifically remember multiple times I would be walking down the hallway and a person of color would get stopped by an administrator in the hallway and asked where their pass was. I never got stopped a single time, and that's my privilege. And we talk about it, but I feel like we need to live it as well.
It's really heartening to hear that this is something that you guys recognize in your lives. Like you're able to point to like these incidents to be like, hey, this happened and it wasn't right. And I'm glad to hear that you guys are talking about it in the classroom. And I'm curious, how do you guys talk about race or racial issues with your friends or with your parents?
For me, my closest friends that I had, we had this thing called hot tub talks, where we just have real conversations whenever we'd go over to our friend's house in hot tub. And that's literally where my curiosity about different political issues started. And that includes racial issues, but it's very tough to talk about those issues within school, for me at least. Mountain View was a little bit slower when it came to handling racial issues, both current and historical stuff. They struggle to add stuff into their curriculums and diversify their teaching staff. So currently today, I'm actually in communications with the principal there and some of the faculty to kind of get back on track to make the faculty more represent the student body and have curriculums that are not whitewashed, but have the actual history written in the textbooks, and then to allow for an atmosphere to have the tough conversations within the classrooms and in the hallways about racial issues. Instead of letting prejudice and racism roam free in the school, you stop it in its tracks and discuss it and find a way to have a teachable moment versus an awkward moment where one person is hurt, another person never learns, I guess. And with my parents, they're the ones that have also shown me a way to be more firm in my belief that these issues are important, that we need to discuss them. Because my parents are white and I'm black, and you know they have the fear for me when I go out at night. But I know through the conversations I've had with them that they understand that there's a level of learning that I've done, but also there's a level of learning I still need to do to be comfortable and be okay to live in America as an African American.
How about the rest of you? That was a great question, Audrey. Just like how are conversations going on within your families or your friend groups right now in regards race and justice?
I think one thing I've noticed is that I feel like younger people are more likely to talk about racial issues than adults. Like even like on Instagram, for example, like I'll see a lot more posts about racial issues from people who are around my age than I do from adults. And I also feel like I am more likely to talk about with my friends than maybe some adults in my life, which is kind of just an interesting observation, I guess. Yeah, I would say I don't talk about it a lot with my friends, but we do a little bit, when it comes up. So, yeah.
I feel like
Yeah,
for me,
like
that like the oh, go ahead. You go.
sorry, I think you went first. You can go.
I'll go quick. I was gonna say with what you were saying about the like younger generations being more willing to talk about it, I've definitely noticed that. I think that the older generations are more worried about what other people are gonna think. That's something I've definitely noticed within my own family, with like my mom I have friends whose parents are police officers, and so she's hesitant to talk about police brutality because she doesn't want to strain those relationships. And I've literally said to her, like, I don't care. Like, if they shouldn't be heard about that, I'm not coming at them. I'm defending a person's humanity, and I shouldn't have to do that. And that shouldn't make anyone mad. And she was just a lot of the older generation is very concerned about how that's going to make other people feel. And I think a lot of the younger generations aren't as much.
Well, and I think you hear that even in the documentary. What are some of their excuses? Well, what is this set of the church going to think about if we engage in this, this very small step? I think, Haley, you were like, it's just such a small thing that they're trying to do. But I think, Lexi, I think you were going to say something. I probably like stepped in on what you were going to say.
Yeah, I was just saying, kind of like what Phil was saying earlier about like in the suburbs, like we kind of have like more of a bubble. And I just feel like within different areas of Minnesota too. Like I was talking like with some of my friends from Forest Lake, Minnesota, and their high school is like 90% white. And like there are people walking around just like making jokes and things like that. And that's just so different from Roseville. I just feel like we're a more diverse community and versus like other schools. And obviously racism is everywhere, but it's just, I feel like they're not really as exposed to things, and they kind of feel like like our friends are saying that like a lot of people that they know in school don't feel the same way about issues as they do, and that's just a little bit different. Like I'm pretty sure people in their community wouldn't be having difficult conversations, like for example, like as we are right now, and that's just a little bit different.
Yeah.
So what are some things that would be steps that we could take in the sense of, so we are having this conversation and we're trying to step into the conversation. We're trying to recognize that some people are in different places in the conversation. Some are really comfortable, and I want to thank you guys for sharing your voices within this. Also realizing that there's some that are really hesitant, that me as one of the older generation, we do. There's a I think what you were saying, Kaylee, that, we are probably a little bit more conscious about hurting feelings, right? And that's not necessarily should be the concern, to your point of saying, if I'm speaking out of the love of another human being, right? So what are some ways that you would like to see Roseville Lutheran Church get engaged in the conversation? What are some things that we can do to not only get engaged in the conversation, but maybe, even that action of working towards justice and equality?
I would for sure say one of the key things, at least for me personally, in my own core, just being a Christian, is that the idea of forgiveness. Recently I had a situation with a friend who had some photos of him wearing blackface and saying the N-word was published on social media, and he got a whole baggage of just people just calling him a racist and a bunch of other stuff, and he was kind of at a place where he didn't know what to do and felt like he was pretty much a racist. And I kind of took it upon myself to go over to his house and kind of just have this tough love conversation with him that lasted over 3 hours, where I just told him, I'm like, I don't want to be here, but my favorite Bible verse is where Jesus tells Philip, forgive not 7 times, but 7 times 70, which is pretty much infinity. And if I can't live up by that verse, then, what good are those words to me then? And so it's just through the scripture and through the Lord's words, we got to figure out how can we bind our differences in a way that we could see the similarities within each other to find common ground and and be able to uplift each other through this difficult time, I would say.
I think that those are some powerful words to live by. Thanks, Phil. How about Kaylee or Alexi or Holly? What are you thinking about right now in terms of Roseville Lutheran Church and what to do, what's next for us?
I really like the idea of doing more stuff like this, like where we have a group of people watch a movie or read a book or something like that and talk about it. Because then I think it does make it more, like, it makes talking about this a little more like fun if you have like something to watch or read and kind of like good to have a discussion about it. So I think that's a great way to be informed. For like the action and actually like putting our words into action part of it, I think it would be good to try to have the church support more like Black-owned businesses or stuff like that, I guess, just to help out the Black community a little more during these times. So yeah.
I really like how the church put out like the yard signs that say like George Floyd was our neighbor, like George Floyd's life matters, Black Lives Matter, because I think kind of just like connecting how in the older film people were afraid of what other people would think, and I feel like Audrey was saying in earlier conversations that there are some people in the church who don't like that you guys included Black Lives Matter on the yard signs, but I feel like that's just something that Black lives do matter. That shouldn't be controversial. And I just feel like that's something that people in the congregation just need to be aware of, that shouldn't be a thing of argument. It's just, I don't know, we should support all people no matter what. And that's just something that it was a leap because not everyone agrees with it, even though, I don't know, I feel like it's the right thing to do, even though not everyone might support it. And I feel like that is the step towards change.
Yeah, and continuing to talk with those people that don't support it, trying to make them understand that it isn't controversial, it's loving your neighbor, it's loving every single person, that's what it's saying, and that's what we do believe as Christians, and just continuing to have conversations. And I think reaching out more to the people of color in our congregation and seeing what they need, and what they want to talk about, because they are the ones that are experiencing this more. Like, I don't experience racism and they do, and finding out what they want and what they need to help them.
And also I'd include maybe having some type of a group study class for looking at the historical context of how maybe the scripture was used in a way to denigrate African Americans or keep African Americans enslaved. Although, you know, stuff like that is not the brightest part of Christianity's history. It's important to kind of learn that timeline of you know, the words that we live by. Somebody was able to, you know, twist those words and use them in such a heinous ways before. And I think that type of understanding of this is what racism really is like here in America will give both the readers and the conversations you have with each other a very fulfilling conversation.
Mm-hmm. How would you like the youth to be engaged in that conversation? I mean, I'm so appreciative of your voices. So how can we have kind of that cross-generational conversation?
I think one of the, like, for me personally, I don't have, you know, African American parents, so that's kind of, it's hard for me to speak fully on this, but I know for sure there's some African American parents who would love to have the opportunity to share to an entire youth audience just about what it is like to live as African American in America. And I could see a lot of kids seeing their parents having this platform to speak about these tough issues and being proud of them and seeing that it's all right to have a voice in this conversation. And I'm sure there's probably some kids who are more than willing to have the ability to teach their fellow friends and their peers about some of the experiences that they've had or what they have to deal with on a daily basis or a weekly basis.
maybe something like with what you're saying, like having people speak and then having discussion questions for like families. So to having kids talk to their parents, I think that's a good way to bridge the generational gap because you already live with them, you have rapport with them, obviously. So I think within families, it's a great place to start.
Great idea. Well, Audrey, do you have any final questions before we close off this conversation?
I guess I just want to say thank you all for speaking up and speaking out. And Phil, I want to celebrate with you that you have the opportunity to talk with your high school and have your perspective heard by your high school, and to feel like you get to make a difference in future generations' lives.
I appreciate it. Thank you. I'm happy, just like how they're listening to me. You guys are listening to everybody, and I appreciate you guys willing to have the opportunity to have this conversation. So thank you.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to close off this portion of the conversation, but I just wanted to again say thank you. God's blessings to all of you as you finish off your summers, as you kind of look forward to finding out exactly what the fall is going to look like. But I just appreciate you, and I appreciate the gifts that God has given you, and thank you for sharing them with us.
Thank you.